Right now, somewhere over the Persian Gulf, a missile is flying. It's called a Tomahawk. It's the size of a telephone pole, it flies just under the speed of sound, and it is very, very good at turning buildings into confetti. But here's the number nobody puts on the news. That missile costs $2.2 million. $2.2 million for one. And it only works once. In the first 4 weeks of America's war with Iran, the United States Navy fired more than 850 of them. That's almost $2 billion. Gone. In a month. Not destroyed, though. That's the trick. Money is never destroyed in a war. It just moves. Because every single one of those missiles gets replaced, bought from one company called Raytheon. When a missile explodes, somebody has to sell you a new one. Which means that somewhere, in some quiet office, every explosion you see on the news is a sale. This is the story of the people who get rich when America goes to war. Not the generals, not the politicians, the invoicers. And the first rule of the business is beautiful. You don't have to win the war. You just have to bill for it. Quick recap, because this war moves fast. In June, after months of on and off fighting, the United States and Iran signed a 60-day ceasefire. America lifted its naval blockade. Negotiators started circling the big prize, $24 billion of Iran's own money, frozen in foreign banks, where Iran can't touch a cent of it. For a few weeks, it almost looked like peace. Then ships started getting attacked near the Strait of Hormuz. Washington blamed Tehran. And on July 8th, the whole thing fell apart. American strikes hit more than 90 targets. The oil sanctions came back overnight. Iran fired back at U.S. bases in Kuwait, Bahrain, and Jordan. Air raid sirens in 3 countries before breakfast. And inside Iran, something historic happened. The supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, died. Millions filled the streets for the funeral. And his son, Mojtaba, inherited the most dangerous job on earth without appearing in public even once. A new king nobody has seen. A ceasefire President Donald Trump declared, quote, over. And a betting market, we'll get to that, quietly pricing in more war. Now, every other channel will tell you about the war. That's not this video. This video is about the paperwork behind it. Because wars don't just run on courage and oil. Wars run on invoices. And somebody's name is on every single one. Let's meet them. In order of how loudly they're celebrating. But first, you need to know this isn't new. This business is older than your country, whichever country you're in. In World War I, one American company sold roughly 40% of the gunpowder the Allies fired. The DuPont family walked out of the deadliest war in history, up to that point richer than entire nations. Congress was so disturbed it held hearings. In the 1930s, senators dragged the arms makers to Washington and gave them a nickname that stuck, the Merchants of Death. And then a United States Marine, Smedley Butler, one of the most decorated soldiers in American history, a man with 2 Medals of Honor, sat down and wrote a little book about his own career. He called it War is a Racket. His argument was simple. He'd spent 33 years fighting around the world, and the people who sent him made fortunes while the people beside him came home in boxes. His words, not mine. And he defined the word for us. A racket, Butler wrote, is something that is not what it seems to the majority of people. Only a small inside group knows what it's really about. It is conducted for the benefit of the very few, at the expense of the very many. Keep that definition in your pocket. You're going to need it for the next 10 minutes. 26 years later, the warning came from even higher up. President Dwight Eisenhower, the general who ran D-Day, the man who beat actual fascism, used his very last speech in office to warn Americans about what he named the military-industrial complex, the 5-star general. warning you about the weapons business. On his way out the door, nobody listened. The business grew. And in 2026, it had its best summer in decades. The day American strikes on Iran began, something interesting happened. Not in Tehran, on the stock market. Lockheed Martin, up 3.4%. Raytheon's parent company, RTX, up 4.7%. Northrop Grumman, up 6%. The missiles hadn't even landed yet. The market had already picked its winners. Then came the contracts. And these are the numbers that should make your eyes water. The Pentagon handed Lockheed Martin a $35.3 billion deal for missile interceptors, a contract that runs all the way to the year 2032. Read that again. The war is months old. The contract is 6 years long. That's not a war order. That's a subscription. The Pentagon told Lockheed to triple production of Patriot interceptors. It signed Raytheon for another $400 million of air-to-air missiles, which in this story is practically a tip. And across the industry, American weapons production quadrupled. Factories that ran one shift now run around the clock. Somewhere in America right now it is 3 in the morning and a machine is quietly assembling a $2 million telephone pole. Time magazine added it all up and called it what it is. A $200 billion windfall. $200 billion. Created by 90 days of shooting. That's more than the yearly economy of most countries on Earth. And here's the genius of the arsenal business. Every interceptor that flies is one more interceptor ordered. Every Tomahawk that lands is a Tomahawk repurchased. War is the only industry on Earth where the customer sets fire to the product and then thanks you and buys it again. Smedley Butler said it a century ago. The racket didn't die, it went public. Now for the second way to get rich, you don't need a factory, you don't even need a product, you need geography. This is the Strait of Hormuz. At its narrowest, it's about 21 miles wide. You could see across it on a clear day. And through this little ribbon of water sails 20% of all the oil and natural gas on planet Earth. 1 in every 5 barrels. Through a gap you could swim across if you enjoyed being arrested by 3 different navies. If you drive a car, heat a home, or buy anything that ever sat on a ship, you are a customer of this strait. You just never got a receipt. When the war reignited, Iran shut it. Tanker traffic stopped. Around 200 ships, each one carrying a small lake of oil, just wandered the ocean, waiting. 200 floating fortunes circling, burning fuel to carry fuel that nobody would let them deliver. And the price of oil did what it always does when 20% of it goes missing. Brent crude spiked 15%, past $80 a barrel. Here's what matters. Nobody drilled a single new well. Nobody produced one extra drop. The oil just got scarce. And scarcity, as we learned from a certain diamond family, is the most profitable product ever invented. De Beers needed 80 years of advertising to manufacture scarcity. A war does it in one press conference. So who cashed in? People who never fired a shot? People who never even left the office? ConocoPhillips posted $2.2 billion in quarterly profit, up 84% from the quarter before. Same company, same wells, same oil. The only thing that changed was the fear. BP did something even better. The quarter before the war, BP lost $3.4 billion. One war later, a $3.8 billion profit, that's a $7 billion mood swing, powered entirely by other people's missiles. Occidental Petroleum watched the price of every barrel it sold jump, and said so, out loud, in its earnings report. War disruption, they explained. Prices up. Thank you for asking. And Canadian producers, about as far from the Persian Gulf as you can physically get, sold every barrel they could pump because desperate buyers don't ask where it's from. Now, none of these companies did anything illegal. Nobody in this entire video did anything illegal. That's the uncomfortable part. They just stood next to a fire, holding the only buckets of water in town, and named their price. If you're still watching, good. Because this is where it stops being about companies you've heard of and starts being about men you've never seen. My favorite winners are the ones nobody ever puts on television. The insurance men. Every ship that enters a war zone needs something called war risk insurance. Think of it as a bouncer's fee for the ocean. Before the war, insuring a tanker through the Strait of Hormuz cost about 0.125% of the ship's value, a rounding error pocket lint. Within days of the first strikes, it tripled. Then it kept climbing. Today, quotes run from 1% to 5% of the ship's value per trip. Do the math on a $100 million tanker. That's $5 million for one voyage through 21 miles of water per trip. Sail monthly, and you're paying more for the paperwork than the ship. That's not insurance. That's a toll booth with a lawyer. Supertanker shipping rates hit all-time highs. Some insurers looked at the strait and simply walked away, refused to cover it at any price. So governments had to step in as the insurers of last resort, which means when the next tanker burns, guess whose money covers it? Yours. And here's the quiet men's final trick. Experts say that even when peace comes, premiums could stay 20 times higher than before the war. Permanently. The fear gets priced in and never priced out. The missiles will stop. The invoices won't. And when the shooting finally ends, the business doesn't end. It flips to Chapter 2, rebuilding. Because someone has to rebuild every bridge, every port, every power plant that a $2 million missile just visited. And the companies that win those contracts are often neighbors of the companies that made the missiles. We've seen this movie. After the Iraq War, one company, Halliburton, collected tens of billions of dollars in reconstruction and logistics contracts. The war destroyed, the contracts rebuilt. The same invoice printer never stopped humming. Destroy, bill. Rebuild, bill. It's the only casino where the house wins on red and black. So when you hear leaders argue about how this war ends, understand. Somewhere, contractors are already sharpening pencils for the reconstruction bids. The peace is being invoiced before it exists. Because here's the thing about a jackpot. The money has to come from somewhere. It comes from you, at the pump, where the numbers spin like a slot machine you can't win. It comes from every product on every shelf. Because everything you own once rode on a ship that now pays 5% protection money to cross 21 miles of water. It comes from ordinary Iranians whose country's $24 billion sits frozen in foreign vaults they will never see, while the banks holding it collect the interest. Frozen for Iran. Working for the bank. And it comes from the American taxpayer who bought every single one of those $2.2 million telephone poles. That first month of missiles, nearly $2 billion, could have built about 40 new schools. Instead, it built about 850 very expensive holes. Remember Butler's definition? Benefits for the very few at the expense of the very many. You've now met the very few. You've been looking at the very many in the mirror every morning. Smedley Butler wrote it in 1935. The profits are private and the bills are public. 100 years later, the math hasn't moved an inch. The jackpot is real. It's just not yours. You're the coin slot. So surely everyone wants this war to end, right? Here's the twist. Peace has a price too. And right now you can literally watch it trade. On Polymarket, a betting market where people wager real money on real-world events, the odds of a final US-Iran nuclear deal by December are just 38%. The odds of even a face-to-face diplomatic meeting happening this month? Roughly a coin flip. That's real money, betting against peace. And watch what the markets did during the war. When the ceasefire collapsed, oil jumped and defense stocks rose. When peace talks were rumored, oil eased. And the same stocks calmly held their gains. Heads, they win. Tails, they don't lose. That's the machine Eisenhower warned you about, standing at the exit 65 years ago. It doesn't need America to win. It doesn't need Iran to surrender. It doesn't even care who's right. It just needs the invoices to keep printing. War used to be politics by other means. Now it's quarterly earnings, so the next time a missile crosses your screen, don't just see the explosion. See the $2.2 million price tag. See the $35 billion subscription. See the 200 wandering ships, the quiet man with the brass dial, and the reconstruction bid that was written before the ceasefire was, a Marine with 2 medals of honor called it a racket. A 5-star general called it a complex. We just call it the power files. Because in this business, the shooting is temporary. The billing is forever. If you want to know who really runs the world, one invoice at a time, subscribe. Barry already did. He's still angry about the gas prices. Next time on the Power Files, the 21 miles of water that hold the entire world hostage.